Well, hello again. I've now moved office, and I'm sitting here joined by Petra Stušek, who is the CEO of Ljubljana Tourism, but more important, or as importantly, she's president of European Cities Marketing. Absolutely delighted to have Petra here. And we're also joined by ETOA's own specialist expert in the field of statistics, David Edwards. Today we're going to be looking, as I mentioned slightly earlier, we're going to be looking at really what's happened, and also, but more importantly, what is the basis for recovery. I must stress that normally we would be asking for questions to be posted via the webinar channel. You will be viewing this through YouTube on the main screen that's dedicated to the ETOA workshop. So if you've got a question, please use the live chat function you've got there, and one of the people here will relay those questions through to me. It's quite important that we get some questions, otherwise you'll be relying on my imagination to come up with different ideas, and that's never a good idea. But I thought what we'd do is start, if possible, with David Edwards, who's going to give us a quick presentation. He can take as long as he likes over it if he wishes. A presentation on what the current situation is and what the prospects are. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I will now go through the aspect of sharing my screen. So I am hoping that you will now be able to see the presentation.
Yeah, we can see the presentation. There we are. It's perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So I wasn't expecting that to happen.
Problem with live TV. All right.
Indeed, yeah. Now it's came out of slideshow. There we go. Right. Hopefully we are good to go. So for the next few minutes, I am going to. Okay. So our journey will cover a global view, then turn our attention to what's happening and expected to happen in Europe. Then I think it's worth pausing and thinking about the fog of uncertainty, as I have termed it. Cities make up a huge part of international tourism within and to Europe, so we will think about what COVID means for cities perhaps over the longer term, and then present a bit of a perspective on what prospects look like. So being a stickler for tradition, we will begin at the start of that list, which is taking a global view. So the most recent analysis from UNWTO is that we can expect a 70% decline in international tourist arrivals in 2020. And UNWTO regularly talks to what it terms its panel of experts. And that panel of experts now expects that there will be some degree of rebound in 2021, but with the consensus being that that rebound is not likely to get under substantive way until Q3 of next year. And also that it will be 2023 when the volumes that we witnessed back in 2019, which I know now seems an awfully long time ago, but when we can next expect to see those sorts of volumes of international travel. Now, apart from the pandemic itself, the panel of experts that UNWTO speaks to has been thinking about what some of the big hurdles that have to be overcome are. And for recovery to really get underway, the issues are around the lack of coordinated response regarding protocols and restrictions. Back in the summer, the World Travel and Tourism Council also did some modelling work in terms of what's been happening and what they expect to happen, and they produced a number of scenarios. It now looks quite likely that for 2020 itself, we're on track for what they termed their worst case scenario. What would that see? Well, that would see globally around about 198 million fewer travel and tourism jobs by the end of this year. It would also see a $5,543 billion loss in travel and tourism GDP. So again, slightly more than 60% reduction on last year. What's driving those declines? Well, a 73% fall in international and a 64% fall in domestic tourist arrivals. IATA, who of course look at civil aviation, well, they're expecting traffic volumes to fall by 61% this year, with revenues down 66%, and revenues falling more than demand because international air travel has been harder hit than domestic air travel in some of the biggest domestic air markets such as China and the US. Looking ahead, revenues in 2021 are set to be 45% lower than they were in 2019. So a degree of improvement on this year is what IATA is expecting, but certainly nowhere near back to the levels that we were used to. And whilst, along with many other umbrella organisations, IATA have been calling for a long time for an easing of travel restrictions, they are working on the presumption that many travel restrictions are likely to exist for the first half of 2021. And now, of course, the Northern Hemisphere winter is always one of the most challenging periods of the calendar for airlines. And this coming winter, it's unlikely that we will see a substantial ski market or indeed a substantial winter sun break. As such, many airlines are going to continue to face extremely harsh headwinds, excusing the pun. IATA have also done some thinking about what this means to the wider economy, and they are anticipating potentially 4.8 million fewer aviation jobs due to the decline in demand and the downsizing that we've seen both in airlines and indeed, of course, in airports. Now, it's worth taking a step back and thinking about where we were, and the European Cities Marketing Benchmarking Report, which was out a week or so ago, is really excellent at allowing us to think where were we and where were we heading before COVID. Just taking here one of the tables, which is in the executive summary, looking at the top 15 European city destinations. And as we can see, there was growth across the board in 2019 compared with 2018. With the likes of Istanbul and Amsterdam enjoying double-digit growth. But moving forward to this year and the future, recent analysis by Tourism Economics for the European Travel Commission has modelled, again, a range of scenarios, and we can see both a baseline, an upside and a downside scenario. Now, in all instances, clearly a dramatic decline in 2020. And in both their base case and their upside, we do see growth returning from that low levels of 2020 from 2021, but again, it being 2023, 2024 before we're back to earlier levels. Now, the downside scenario, which was, we have to acknowledge, produced before the encouraging news regarding vaccines, that assumed a deterioration in 21 compared to 2020. Also within the same quarterly analysis, ETC have looked at data from STR, who do a range of hotel benchmarking, and what we're looking at here for Europe as a whole and then different regions within Europe are what has been happening, or at least what was happening in the first 3 quarters of this year, to room rates, to occupancy and to RevPAR. And frankly, it's not good whichever part of Europe you are in. Some parts of Europe slightly less bad than others, but by and large, a fairly grim picture being painted for the accommodation sector. On then to what I have termed the fog of uncertainty. Now, forecasting relies on assumptions, but as a rule, there's a degree of certainty within which you can make those assumptions. However, in 2021, probably a more accurate term for forecasting would be guesscasting, because there is just so much that we haven't been able to pin down, so many unknowns regarding the pandemic itself, how governments are reacting, how industry is reacting, and of course how consumers are reacting. So the arrival of an effective vaccine is certainly a leap forward in terms of clearing up some of that uncertainty. But one of the things I do think we have to be quite cautious about is what I have termed here optimism bias. I'm all in favour of being positive and upbeat. However, I think one of the challenges in 2020 has sometimes been messaging from governments that has indicated that things are going to get better rather more quickly than the reality that has panned out suggests. And therefore, I think we have to be cautious, although we can be, to an extent, looking forward to some positivity in 2021. We do have to be cautious. And we may well see improvements in terms of the health situation during the upcoming months, but it is likely that there are still going to be a range of border protocols in place. And one of the other issues that may start to raise its head as we move deeper into next year is that those people who have been fortunate enough to be vaccinated may well start to be somewhat frustrated, let's say, if they discover that to travel to a particular country, they are still required by that country to take a PCR test and potentially have to pay for a test, when they will potentially feel, well, hang on, I've been vaccinated against this. So I think procedural challenges ahead in 2021. There are some common themes regarding the outlooks, not just from the organisations I've already spoken about, but a whole host of others that have thought about what the future is going to hold. Those common themes include that it's going to be 3 or 4 years before tourism is back to where it was in 2019. That domestic and, let's call it, regional tourism is likely to recover more quickly than international and particularly long-haul tourism. That leisure travel may well recover more quickly than business and those larger events. That fully independent travel set to recover more quickly than group tours, and that there is an increased interest in rural destinations, activities and experiences. Now, whilst those are common themes across a whole range of forecasts that have been produced, it's important to say that sometimes those who are pontificating about the future can end up with what you might term a herd instinct. So one expert has said something and other experts therefore think, yeah, that's probably about right, isn't it? So just because lots of people have identified these as common themes, as I'm doing now, does not mean that this is a guarantee in terms of what we are about to expect in 2021 and indeed the year or two after. Now, at the beginning, I said it was worth pausing and thinking about cities because they play such an important role in European tourism. And what I've termed it here is long COVID for cities. So what do we mean by this? We've all become used to working from home, and it is reasonably well agreed now that the amount of commuting to and from offices is not going to go back to where it was. This is not saying that there will be no office work, because there will, but a growing number of people will work at least perhaps part of the week from home. That, of course, then means there will be fewer commuters heading into major cities. Now, in turn, that means that less office space will be required. Even if everybody just went from working 5 to 4 days a week, in theory, that means a fifth of current office space could be surplus to requirements. And in turn, that opens up an opportunity for those buildings, that infrastructure to be repurposed. And it could be used for accommodation or indeed for other leisure facilities. But it also poses a challenge. Particularly, it poses a challenge for hospitality businesses that rely very much on commuter footfall for part of their trade. And that then in turn, as tourism starts to recover, will hopefully ensure that authorities across cities and governments realize just how important tourism is to the vitality and the vibrancies of city centres, because there will be fewer commuters helping to keep that going. Some of you may have heard me talk already this year about my 3 M's, so those essential ingredients for tourism recovery. Those 3 M's are motivation to visit, money to spend, and means of travel. In terms of motivation, I think we can be really very positive here. For most potential travellers, they are still very motivated. They don't want to say, no, do you know what? I'm just going to sit at home forever and a day now. Most people absolutely will want to travel again when it is possible and safe to do so. In the short term, at least, some behaviours may well have changed. But motivation, I'm positive about. Money to spend, the second M, I am more twitchy about. Now, the young have taken a larger hit than a more mature market segment thus far during the pandemic. And I think it is fair to say that in most economies, so both most origin markets for Europe and indeed within Europe, the true economic impact will not be felt until 2021 and potentially thereafter, both in terms of the initial issues of people not having a job, and then as governments start to try and figure out how do we recoup some of this huge amount of spending that has been made, that in turn will potentially have a dampening impact on consumer spending. On to the third M then, means of travel. Now, the supply primarily of air, but also of ferry, of rail, is likely to remain somewhat restricted in 2021 compared with where it was in 2019. Initially, that is likely to mean some hugely competitive fares as carriers start to try and draw people back into the market. However, if demand does start to recover more quickly than some anticipate, that could lead to somewhat higher travel fares during the latter stages of the upcoming year. Now, a bonus M then for us, a fourth M, which I have termed memories. And this is all about the fact that people go on holiday because they want to have fun and laughter. They want to see the landscape. They want to do things in cities, go to the theatre, go to bars, eat in wonderful restaurants, just enjoy the streetscapes that you can find across Europe. And there is a real risk here that some of the supply side I've put there permanently scarred, and hopefully it isn't really permanently, but at least for a period of time, the visitor experience may well be denuded by the fact that there is just less stuff that people are able to do. So what can we expect then? Well, I think it's not being too dramatic to say, or too surprising to say, Q1 of 2021 is probably going to be just as bad as the final 3 quarters of 2020. As we move into Q2 of next year, then it starts to get a little bit more tricky. I'm still erring on a somewhat cautious perspective. And overall, I think the first half of next year looks really very challenging for pretty much all market segments. Now, we may well then see, as we head into high summer of 2021, a return of international travel that is somewhat more rapid than has been talked about. And people may say, hey, look, we're going to be back to where we were in 2019 much sooner. However, as I've termed it there, we need to be really careful that we don't misinterpret some of that growth, because it may well be people who effectively committed to 2020 trips, accepted a future travel voucher, and are now making good on that voucher, rather than perhaps being a signal of a more rapid return than some people have spoken about. So with international travel still likely to be facing constraints for a number of months, potentially into the early part of summer 2021, I think there is certainly strong potential for destinations and that focus primarily on a domestic and a more regional market than there is for those businesses and destinations that have relied traditionally much more heavily on an international market. So that was was a real race through. I hope that some of it made some sense, and I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and we can start to have a Q&A and a broader discussion. So thank you.
Well, David, thank you very much. You, as usual, are studiously careful in your predictions and prognostications. For the purposes of this exercise, I think I'll pretend to be a lot more bullish. But before I start being bullish, I think I'm going to turn around to Petra, who's been sitting there very patiently. Petra, I mean, you are both heading up Cities for Europe and indeed one of the great ancient city destinations in Europe. Do you feel that, firstly, what has your experience of this year been like? And do you see things returning in the way that David has depicted them?
First of all, hello to everyone. It would be very fair to say it has been a unique experience and this year, and I think that everyone experienced that it is their own unique experiences. I mean, after first essential shock, which actually nobody believed that what is going to develop into, we needed to, all of us needed to reorganize ourselves, digitalize over the night, and start to talk to, domestic travelers, which is something that quite a few destinations did not do as much before. For example, for my Ljubljana head, I can say that we've had 97% of travelers foreign origin, only 4% domestic. So we all needed to make a very quick shift in our minds, very, basically over the night. But what is the most frustrating nowadays is these quickly changing scenarios. I'm pretty sure that everyone is going through that. You need to be prepared. Today you decide something, and tomorrow you need to repurpose the whole thing one more time. But it is also fair to say that whoever I speak with, we are all aware of the seriousness of the situation, not only the health issue, but also the economic side of it, and also the state of mind side of it. But we are optimistic. I mean, people always traveled since ever. I mean, back in the ancient times, it was called migration. Today, it's called traveling, and we are going to continue to do it. It's just a question of when, but nobody knows it. I mean, trends are saying that it was brilliant what you put together, David, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for that. But who knows? I mean, maybe everything will change already in the 21. So again, we just need to be prepared to adapt quickly and change scenarios one more time. And we are overall optimistic that at least individual travels are going to pick up very quickly. Even now we're seeing for the destinations that are shyly already announced in some sort of a ending or releasing the lockdowns, already the Christmas bookings and picked up immediately. So people responded immediately, and this is what probably is going to happen in 21. If destination will be perceived as safe at the moment, people will go there.
Yeah, I think that's a super valid point. I think the situation, the strange thing is that we're being asked to draw lessons from a very, very abnormal period. No one would describe the situation that we're going through as remotely normal, and I don't think it represents a new normal. I'd perhaps ask David for his opinion on this. I've been stressing recently that if you try and adapt to the current environment, you're adapting to the wrong environment. The thing that we're sitting through at the moment is not going to continue it will continue, but it will end. And I think we'll be looking at a post-COVID environment. And I think there's going to be a reasonably sharp demarcation between people having to be careful, maybe getting tests, maybe getting vaccines, and we were in an environment where we were in a slow emergence from a COVID world. During that period, tourism's bound to continue to be suppressed, maybe less and less so. But there's got to be a tipping point where herd immunity, established presumably through a vaccination scheme, herd immunity cuts in. And at that point, well, is it going to be gradual? Is it going to be fast? That's the open question. David, do you think that there will be a tipping point where herd immunity cuts in and people go, right, it's now safe to travel. We can drop all our restrictions. Things can formally get back to normal based on, they're allowed to get back to normal. They may not get back to normal, of course, because that requires all sorts of things like consumer behavior. But do you think there will be a tipping point where basically the light goes green and everything starts again?
I think that there will be a point where a light goes green, but the problem is that there is a whole gantry, if you like, of signals that are either red, green, or amber. And what we need is all of them to be going green. That's in terms of individual markets as source markets, but also destinations, travel from the consumer confidence point of view, but also governments and indeed businesses in terms of the requirements that they put in place, the advisories that they publish. So yes, I think you're right that there will be a tipping point, but those tipping points will be at different points of the calendar in different source markets, and potentially at different points in the calendar in different destinations. And for tourism to recover quickly between any particular points, you need the lights to be green at both ends, if you like. But yes, I do think that there will come a point when people think, blimey, I really feel as though that's behind us now. I can start to do things. And a lot of people have talked about post-COVID tourism and tourism reimagined, which I think is slightly overblown, in that most of the reasons that people took trips in 2019 will still be the reasons they will want to take trips in 2021 and 22 and beyond. So I don't see some seismic change in the sorts of places that people want to go, the sorts of things they want to do when they get there, and their general behaviors. Yes, there will be some nuances there, and I do think, as we alluded to in the presentation, maybe cities changing because of something else that COVID has accelerated, that reduction in office working. That may end up being a longer term impact on city tourism in some places than actually any change in behavior brought about by having lived through a pandemic will deliver.
Yeah, we ought to drop the traffic light imagery, and it's my fault for introducing it, because of course if a green light goes on, it implies there's a red light going on somewhere else. But the Petra, I mean, do you think there is going to be a major change to tourism as a result of this?
That's again a question that at the moment doesn't really have an answer, but in my opinion, yes, I mean, of course it will change. I mean, we all still remember 9/11, and we all go to the planes without water and not even questioning ourselves anymore. There will be things that will change. People will stop also traveling for business as much. I mean, we won't be hopping on a plane for one-day meeting to Brussels anymore, you know, to European Commission, for example, because it's so much more convenient and easier to do it in a cyberspace or via an online meeting. And we all learned that, and we all experienced that. So yes, some things are going to change, and the perks of technology are going to accelerate, for definitely. Also in not only in MICE, but also in, I don't know, in contactless receptions on hotels and so forth. These are the things that are going to change much quicker than we anticipated to, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And then there is a buzzing word, magic word of sustainability. It has been so much on our minds for a long time now, and some destinations were actually doing it or living by it. Some were still learning. Now everyone is talking about how sustainability is going to be a big issue in general, not only in travel. And so these we will start to look at from different perspectives as well, different types of different means of transport to start with, or less planes, more trains, circle from around 500 where you can travel by car. So these are slowly changing patterns that are ahead of us, I'm pretty sure in that, and more getting used to technology, like I said before. But in general, we will be the same curious about the other cultures, the destinations we haven't seen yet. I mean, even when we saw in the third quarter of this year, what happened when the lockdowns were not as strict throughout Europe, people started to travel right away. I mean, visitations of iconic attractions have been stable in October, and more than 1 in 2 mobile devices captured in researches still belong to a tourist. So 20% of those coming tourists from abroad were from more than 300 kilometers away, and that was in this very troubled year that was happening in end of September, in October. So maybe that was still remains of old patterns, but I kind of doubt that. I really believe that people will want to travel again fairly soon, but as emphasized before, when they will feel safe. So it's really important to have either certification programs throughout Europe, or having a really good guidance from European Union and wider. Something needs to guide people that they will feel safe throughout the whole continent, or someone.
Well, goodness gracious me, indeed, as I say, I mean, we've actually got a question here, which more or less, which more or less sort of is in the area you're talking about, which is that, do you think that one should now draw a line under tourism as we know it, and for 2021 we open a new page and perhaps redefine tourism with the future in mind, rather than trying to revisit old concepts, marketing destinations in a new manner, a fresh look at everything? There's going to be a new dawn out there. What do you think about that, Petra? David's already more or less answered that question from his point of view, I think. But do you think we're going to be doing things differently in future because of this, or do you think we're going to revert very much to the same pattern?
Well, honestly, I do hope that we learn something from just the recent past. In many destinations, we were talking about the over-tourism and poorly managed destinations, tourism-wise. But I do also have how should I say, in my own opinion about this new normal. Normal is normal. Our normal today is normal how it is today. So what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't forget the best practices and good already implementing things in tourism from the past. But yes, of course, we will have to repurpose a lot of it also in the very near future, because not only people will be sensitive to a general, how should I say, sanitizing of destination, or general feeling safe and healthy in the foreign destinations, but we'll have to develop these new patterns that will be, now I forgot what I actually wanted to round it up with, but the key word will be to feel safe. And that is something that we did not put an emphasis or focus on before, and now will be. So in this sense, much will change. In terms of building different tourism offer or different experiences, I don't think so. I mean, it's same still us. I mean, the humans are still the same. We're still responding to similar things. So we should not change good practices from the past.
I mean, I tend to agree with you, and I would echo what David says. Stonehenge is not going to change. I mean, it hasn't really changed for a rather long time. There's an argument it could do with the lick of paint, but not many people would buy into that theory. I think it will just carry on being itself very quietly and be one of the leading attractions of Europe. I think, but I think that I think change will happen. For what it's worth, I'll give you my picture on this. And what we've gone through has obviously been a traumatic experience. Plenty of marginal businesses will have gone to, well, all marginal businesses will have gone to the wall. Valid, good, worthwhile businesses will have suffered and disappeared as well. And so this sort of culling is going to have necessarily a transformative effect, but it will take its transformative nature alongside all the other things that are changing. And one of the big things that are changing is the new empowerment of tourists. So one virtue, if there is a virtue in what we've gone through, is the fact that no one is complaining about over-tourism at the moment. We've had a vivid illustration of the importance of tourism and the vital contribution it makes to nearly every service economy in Europe. And I think people will have a newfound respect and indeed desire to see leisure tourists in their locale. What's interesting is that this is taking place at the same time as these tourists who are arriving are getting smarter. They're far better informed about what they're seeing, they're far better informed about what they're buying, and they're far better at buying the right thing. So, I mean, we're looking at dynamics taking place which will cause transformation irrespective of COVID, closing down office spaces, creating areas inside cities which can be devoted either to residential or leisure purposes, which David raised. So yes, what we'll see is an intensification of change. I don't think the baseline appeal will change that much, but I may be wrong. But I think what we need to do, I mean, this is a broader thought of what's happening in the future. I can just bring the conversation back round to recovery. And I'm going to, my job, David's job is to be cautious. My job is to be determinedly optimistic. And as David would point out, there is no greater stupidity than a determined optimist, riding for a fall. But I would turn around and say, look, we've got a vaccine here. However, I've got a feeling there are going to be many more stories about the vaccine before the vaccine is out and fully accepted. But we will see some form of herd immunity by the end of Q2. We may even see it beforehand. But by the end of Q2, we will have seen some herd immunity. From Europe as a destination's point of view, we've got lots of Americans sitting there with travel credits, ready to come to Europe. We've got lots of people who have not, whilst there is economic suffering, there are a lot of people who haven't suffered that badly, and the people who haven't suffered that badly are actually in the target market for travel to Europe, both within Europe and outside Europe, particularly for city tourism. Your standard city tourism customer will have not, will have carried on their professional job remotely. They're probably still in work, and they haven't had an opportunity to spend any money. And so they've got a big pad of money sitting there, and suddenly they're allowed to go, and they're allowed to go at a time when Europe is unprecedentedly empty and the prices will be unprecedentedly competitive. I think we're going to see, the dawn, not the dawn breaking. We're going to see the sun coming out like it does behind a cloud at midday. I think we're going to see, a good summer. Not a great one, not 2019, but nothing that looks like 2020. We have another question. Sorry, it's just something to say. It says the UK has been fairly united with its good to go message logo. Do you feel that a similar united European message will assist with the restart? So this is assuming that the restart takes place before the herd immunity green light, if I can use the metaphor I dismissed earlier again. assuming that we have a restart before the green light, do you think there are similar initiatives in Europe? I know there is one promoted by European ETOA, but there are other initiatives. Do you think this is helpful? Petra, are you aware of initiatives in Ljubljana or indeed in Europe?
If you mean by national initiatives,
yeah, the national initiatives, making sure that we're doing everything we can to make you safe.
Honestly, no, I don't think we're there yet. For simple reason, because politics that still doesn't have a clear view on what to regard first or how to balance the health issue, the economic issue. So it again depends from country to country. So I think there is still a way ahead of us before we get there. Also on the European Union level, it could go smoother, should be more, how should I say, should be more guided. But if we have a look at from nation to nation, there you see that the public and private sectors are organizing themselves fairly efficient in the circumstances. So things are going further, and yeah, that is my opinion.
Okay, David, you have an angle on that?
I guess my angle on that is that such schemes are certainly not unhelpful, but ultimately what influences people is what are the numbers that come after the dollar, euro, or pound sign. Is where I want to go open. Will I be able to do what I want to do when I get there? So not unhelpful, but from my perspective, there's certainly no silver bullet.
Right. One last question, which is that what do you think travel organizers can do to encourage holiday makers in 2021? What can they do? Petra, what do you reckon they could do?
Just for now, talk to your clients and I mean, keep this constant conversation with them, and because it's so vague situation for everyone that it's impossible to really steer them towards. For now, it's the best option is to maintain the how do you call it? The mutual contact. And just to remind them that Europe is actually was a most attractive spot to visit and will be also in the future. So it's a very tough one to say, but it's good to remind them of through the memories of all the beautiful destinations throughout from their throughout the Europe and the world, and to fill them in with the most recent trends and information from those destinations. I mean, the communication is the key. The communication is the key.
No, I think communication. David, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I guess it's about being responsive, but it's always about being responsive, but being ready to be really fleet of foot. So being ready to adapt and change at short notice, because I absolutely don't disagree that there could be demand above that which we are anticipating, and everyone within the sector needs to be ready to ensure that if that demand starts to return, it can be welcomed with open arms.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the fact that we're gently running out of time. I'm gonna just ask Petra, when do you think, when do you think recovery, when you will start to see something like 2010 volumes, for example? When are we going to see that in 2021? And when are we going to see 2019 again? It's two quick answers. When do you think that's going to, what's 2021 going to look like? And when are we going to see 2019 again?
2021, my guess would be that it would be like 30 to 40% more than this year. well, much rather more than 40% than this year. And when will we return to the actual 2019? I hope never, because it was a bit. I mean, let me elaborate it. Not in a sense. I mean, only in the sense of statistics, because it was exaggerated looking globally. But in terms of organic growth of tourism back in the destinations, my guess would be in less than 3 years, like in 2.5 to 3 years. Yeah.
David, do you want to take a punt on this?
I reckon that 2021 may well end up around about 60% of 2019 levels, and we could be back close to 2019 by 2023. So I'm not that different from Petra, I would argue, but we are whistling in the wind, frankly, because just as the last 9 months have demonstrated, stuff happens that we don't expect, and
you're right.
stuff might happen.
A fool asks wise people to make predictions, and you've been very, very graceful about it. I think it's really up to me. We're drawing to the end of our time. I feel this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Petra, for joining me. Thank you so much, David, for sharing with us the information you have. The slides that we have are going to be available on our website. And I'm now going to gently depart and have a quick word with everybody on the other screen. So thank you very much, Petra. Thank you very much, David. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.